My name is Elena Guerreira Labrador. I come from the Universidade de Santiago de Compostela and more specifically from the research group Discurso e Identidad. Although the title of my paper was originally in Spanish, I will be presenting this talk in English, for this is my field of studies, British literature, and it just makes sense. So the title of my presentation in English is the following one: Queer Identities, Liminality through Jackie Kay's LGBT short stories. Here you can see my table of contents, and I will be guiding you through the different sections I have created. And the first one, as usual, it's the introduction. As a black lesbian, Jackie Kay is herself a liminal author who introduces similarly interstitial themes in her short fiction. Why Don't You Stop Talking, 2002, is her first collection of short stories. Protagonists somehow belong to social minorities. Their identities are problematized given the conjunction of different factors, such as gender, obesity, loneliness, or displacement. In this sense, Kay's short stories often include liminal situations and characters, for she focuses on the lives of people who are undefined or whose experiences oscillate between belonging to a community and being alienated. In this case, the aim of this paper is to explore the way in which boundary crossings or transitional liminal identities are portrayed in Kay's short story Big Milk as an example of Scottish contemporary literature. It is crucial to take into account that the anthology Why Don't You Stop Talking was published in the year 2002, and therefore social circumstances have changed regarding the acceptance of the LGBT collective during the last 2 decades. It is my contention that Kay's LGBT characters in her tale Big Milk, as well as the intersection with different social factors, are especially significant in terms of the application of the concept of liminality and queer theory. In this sense, it is also interesting to infer how, due to its brevity and episodic structure, the short story privileges the depiction of transitional situations and moments of crisis, according to Achilles and Bergman, as we shall see with the example of Kay's story. The next section I will be guiding you through is that of motherhood in Big Milk. Big Milk is a fascinating tale in which the fact that the protagonist couple is homosexual is not really relevant. Kay analyzes in depth the themes of motherhood and adoption. She presents a mulatto woman whose partner has been the biological mother of a baby girl. We understand as we read Big Milk that the mulatto woman, narrator and protagonist of the story, is mother of the baby as well, but not the biological one. The protagonist feels displaced and jealous because of the relationship of the baby girl in nursing and her partner. However, Kate does not make very explicit allusions to whether or not that jealousy is motivated because she is not the biological mother of the baby, or because the baby was not born to her. We may infer as we read that she does not feel as the mother of the baby, but would not that happen anyways if she were a man and not a lesbian woman? According to Carla Rodríguez González, entre las dos mujeres se reproducen los esquemas tradicionales de posesión de la pareja heterosexual, y así la madre se convierte en el objeto de deseo simultáneo del bebé y de la otra mujer. Su cuerpo es el espacio que determina el poder que tiene sobre ella cada una de las dos integrantes de su familia. Sin embargo, la jerarquía de las necesidades hace que el vínculo con su hija sitúe en un segundo plano a la otra mujer, que siente emociones contradictorias hacia la niña, debido principalmente al modo en que reifica a su madre, cuyo cuerpo queda reducido a la denominación de sus dos pechos en función de la cantidad de alimento que le pueden proporcionar. Big Milk, Tiny Milk. The mother-child relationship between the biological mother and the baby she gave birth to are regarded through the lens of the sentimental partner, who envy such a symbiosis. Nevertheless, such envy is not motivated fundamentally because she does not feel as the mother of the child, but because the protagonist has not experienced herself such a period of lactation and nursing, given her condition of adopted girl when she was born. The main character in Big Milk, an alter ego of the author, is a good example of intersections when it comes to social minorities. She is a mulatto lesbian woman who was adopted as a baby. Abandoned when born, what she desires is to find her own biological mother, but she does not reflect about her sexual orientation and identity. Nevertheless, it is interesting to note how Aguirre holds that to postulate element in the field of liminality, meaning threshold or limbo, has to do with fluidity and unfinished identities. In this case, the baby girl and the biological mother are somehow a fluid whole, and the protagonist does not belong to such a wholeness. The story Big Milk is a transition itself because it constitutes a physical trip to find one's root, but also a symbolical odyssey to the understanding of one's true identity and place within society. Turner holds that liminality is a game of disorder out of which new orders emerge, and this is what happens here in Kay's tale, for the main character is situated in a threshold between belonging to a family and feeling displaced. Theoretically, it is important to understand that liminality deeply analyzes the descriptions of boundary crossings as spaces with density and dynamics of their own, according to Achilles and Bergman. The unnamed protagonist of Big Milk is clearly placed at a crossroads or boundary as far as her life situation is concerned. Now we go back to the table of contents, and the next section, as you can read, is queer literature. I will be discussing Big Milk as an example of queer literature. There is an existing label called gay and lesbian writing, and it constitutes a problematic category in large part because the meanings of gay, lesbian, and other related concepts, such as queer and homosexual, have been so intensely contested, according to Stevens. Defining gay and lesbian writing is by no means straightforward, or even desirable, because of the need to ask oneself if the matter in hand is to analyze literature written by lesbians and gay men, or with literary representations of same-sex desire. Also, another issue to take into account is that of the literary representations of desire between male friends or between female friends as gay and lesbian. All of these questions are useful when tackling this label of gay and lesbian writing, which is so controversial. The unnamed narrator in Kay's selected story, being Kay herself a lesbian, we could consider her tale as part of gay and lesbian writing in a sense, theorizes about missing sexual relationships, but her sexuality is completely normalized. Being Big Milk the second of the stories in the collection Why Don't You Stop Talking, it is the first example of sexual orientation that Jackie Kay presents as completely integrated within society. In a time in which not even homosexual marriage was allowed in the United Kingdom, Jackie Kay introduces a lesbian character who does not seem to care about how her sexual orientation is regarded. She simply lives with a woman and they have a child in common. Kay neither talks about discrimination nor about the fight for LGBT rights in this particular tale. She just shows the readership how the life of people belonging to a sexual diversity can be exactly the same to that of a heterosexual couple, with the same worries and problems. Maybe that is why Big Milk is such a subversive text. Kay presents these characters in a post-queer society, at least for the year 2002, when the story was published. This tale has, with no doubt, contemporary relevance. Although 2 decades have passed since its publication, we still do not live in that post-queer society in which sexual orientations outside of heteronormativity are so well integrated and accepted. Is Jackie Kay in this sense a utopian author? Although she seems to demonstrate with Milk a story in which she depicts a problem which has presumably nothing to do with the couple's lesbianism, is that Kay gives hope to the lesbian collective. In fact, this is a very effective story when it comes to the fighting for the rights of the LGBT community. Sexual orientation should not be a social variable that allows to categorize people, and that is what Jackie Kay wants in Big Milk. Now I'm going to show some examples from Big Milk illustrating different types of liminalities, taking into account the background of queer literature. So these are some examples chosen from Jackie Kay's Big Milk, which illustrate the liminalities and the fluid gender identity of the main character. In this case, we may point out the fact that the lover calls the protagonist a man, or actually she tells her, "You're worse than a man." Of course she's not a man, she's a woman, but she's not a normative woman, for she's a lesbian. According to Monique Wittig, lesbians are not women, which is very interesting here. We could apply Monique Wittig's critic theory to Kay's paragraph in this case. In this specific quotation, the protagonist of Jackie Kay's short story is being discriminated by her own sentimental partner, with whom she's supposed to be comfortable, since she is already displaced from mainstream society because of the features that make her in fact a liminal character. Another aspect to bear in mind within this line of thought of queer literature or gay or lesbian writing is that of the postulates of queer theory. According to Teresa Moure, a teoría queer exigiría a liberación das identidades. En vez de dous polos ben definidos, home ou muller, existiría unha gradación de identidades intermedias, onde cada suxeito máis ou menos se insire, de xeito que deixa de recoñecerse como decididamente home ou decididamente muller para adoptar unha identidade negociada entre indicios diversos de masculinidade e feminidade. It is especially interesting because the queer continuum is liminal by itself, given that it shows a transition of identities. So gender identity, according to queer theory, is in constant variation in any person, depending on the identity human beings are given at each stage of their lives, depending on different contextual situations or biographical appreciations. Indeed, Teresa Moure highlights that the cases in the border are interesting because of this intermediate nature. She is talking in liminal terms, although she does not mention this in her work Cuiremos un mundo novo. Queer theory seems very appropriate for the application of the concept of liminality, to study those intermediate stages that do not belong to different binary strict oppositions. In this particular passage, we see the importance of ethnicity in this tale. Big Milk is also post-ethnic, it is not just post-queer, because Jackie Kay emphasizes a lonely motherhood and a problematized identity, alienated from society because of the conjugation of different social factors. However, she is not vindicating anything. She just puts there the social factors as a description for us to feel the characteristics of this alienation and how this woman needs to escape from her own background because she is obsessed and frustrated and suffocated because of her own identity. This tale is very subversive because Jackie Kay's protagonist needs to adapt herself to a subversive type of motherhood and life. She was never breastfed and she cannot return to the maternal womb. As an adopted child who was abandoned by her mother, she was never breastfed, and that makes her different from those born in a heteronormative background. Again, the fact that her skin is brown and different from her mother's suggests that she's mulatto and her mother is white. In fact, Jansen holds how Big Milk leaves no doubt that the unnamed narrator is black. On the other hand, it is important to mention as well the concept of queer of color critique, which, according to Amin, comes from the field of intersectionality proposed by Kimberly Crenshaw, and it is explored in Shandan Reddy's works, among others. It shows the intersection between queer theory and other factors, such as race and class. Queer of color analysis focuses on black women who are queer. Indeed, according to Shandan Reddy, queer of color critique emphasizes the varied agencies, relationalities, and cultural morphologies that exist in the interstices or thwart the very social forms that even radical or oppositional social struggles rely on. It focuses on difference, on the concept of diversity, not just regarding sexual orientation, but also cultural morphologies, and it studies the interests, which is most relevant in the framework of liminality and queer theory, to study the interests, the importance of boundary crossings. Reddy notes how queer of color critique comes from a variety of fields, such as queer, post-colonial, ethnic, indigenous, and feminist studies. Even if those are theories and movements that try to include the need to understand minorities in a sense, they still made visible the Western settler colonial white male heterosexual social order. Thus, queer of color critique explores the fracture that comes from the interests between race, gender, and sexuality. In this passage, we see another type of liminality which shows the intersection between gender and sexual orientation with other factors, such as age. In this case, we have baby-adult liminality. The age factor becomes especially significant because there is a sort of symbiosis and an interstice in which the boundaries of age are blurred once adults have babies, because they want to adapt themselves to their babies, to educate them, and understand them better. Indeed, Kay points out how many of the adults I know are now becoming babyfied. They talk a baby language to each other. This next description, in case page 34, emphasizes as well this baby-adult liminality because the protagonist is reminded of everything she missed as an infant during her childhood, now that she has become a mother. Although we do not know her age, she is a character who's been transformed into a baby, in search for these elements she lost, meaning breastfeeding and traditional motherhood. And she does not understand that she needs to accept her own identity and forget how her life would have been if she were breastfed and was not given on adoption. According to Jansen, the narrator's sharp differentiation between breastfeeding and spoon-feeding metaphorically encapsulates her unspoken assumption that an acknowledged familiar relationship of flesh and blood is more genuine than an adopted family. Once she visits her mother in Scotland at the hotel, there is a very interesting element, which is the two thimbles of milk representing the breasts, being the size of large nipples, and how this milk is not enough and she is not satisfied because she does not get what she wants for real, although in the end what she needs is to confront reality. When she sees that her mother's house is abandoned and notices the two sour bottles of milk which are lumpy, she needs to accept that it is dark because she does not belong there. Her role now is that of being a mother. Jansen emphasizes how this powerful image highlights that the quality of familial relationships depends less on blood ties and the ability of breastfeeding and more on actual presence, attention, care, and love. In fact, Rodríguez González also points out this issue. Los vínculos de sangre no son más que una parte de un discurso sobre la identidad que no tiene ninguna relevancia para ella. Sus obsesiones dejan paso a una profunda decepción, a un vacío que la protagonista, el alter ego de Kay, o cualquier sujeto para el que las narraciones normativas de la identidad no resulten válidas, tendrá que rellenar con otro tipo de narraciones propias con las que hacer frente a las carencias que se proyectan sobre quienes no beben directamente de las fuentes de la norma que define la comunidad. So, as a conclusion, overall, Kay's work introduces the readership to a family that takes for granted the normativity of its unconventionality from the very beginning. They are in the borders, and the protagonist is in the border of the maternal-filial relationship. The question which arises from the reading of Big Milk may be whether or not Kay is an author who cultivates social criticism and denunciation. As an example of queer literature and liminal identities, this tale is very powerful. Although the social elements are not the key to understand the text, since that is the search for the maternal womb, in a sense, this sort of Oedipus complex and this liminal state when it comes to the psyche of the protagonist also cultivate social criticism. It contributes to the denunciation of the displacement of someone who is not heteronormative. And this is Jackie Kay. And now my works cited, which is here. These are the works I have used to write my discourse. And back to the beginning. Thank you very much.